All right. All right. Tonight we have Dell from St. Ambrose University Esports. Now, we haven't had much of a chance to connect before recording this podcast due to an earlier blunder I had this week where I messed up recording audio for some reason. Somehow I completely messed that up. So you're going to have to do a little bit more work in introducing yourself and tell me your role with SAU Esports.
All right. Well, my name's Ben, Grieser. 23 years old. I'm from a small town called Kalispell, Montana, and I currently attend St. Ambrose University. Most people that know me in the Overwatch scene know me from Bye It was a team that I co-created with Carbon and Aether and Trishoy, and we went to NA contenders and went on an infamous run running a lot of tanks. Other than that, just a guy with a couple sisters that grew up in a really small town that's chasing his Overwatch dream. And I'm guessing the captain of SAU. I mean, I'm the last man standing of the original roster, so it's a little bit a little bit hard to have a team when you only have one player at the moment.
Yeah. No, is that a new development or is that something you've been having to work through over the summer?
So we had a roster for the first semester of school. So our school is basically like a fall, winter, or fall to December semester, and then a December to or like a January to April semester. And so we're just basically what happened was the first wave of players that came. We're having some trouble just adjusting to the collegiate life and just didn't do as well as I wanted to, and decided to pursue some other options. But we have a whole five new faces coming actually tomorrow. Tomorrow's move-in day for the new semester, so we'll have a full team again.
Awesome. Now, is Overwatch your primary game at SAU?
Yeah, Overwatch is my love in life and a lot of things, but I pretty much play Overwatch all the time. But I've also played Paladins for SAU. I'm going to be playing Fortnite, PUBG, and some H1Z1 as well, just on the side.
What other? So, I mean, you just listed a whole lot. Are those the main games for SAU then?
SAU has scholarships for League of Legends and Overwatch, and then they're looking to expand into BRs soon. We'll probably have like a dedicated BR team. I'm just doing it because it's extra prize money to win or scholarships, so no reason not to, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, I hadn't heard of St. Ambrose University until I had been following everyone on Twitter and trying to track down more people for the podcast. Now, how is it that SAU started their varsity program?
SAU basically, so from my understanding of it, is they had a forward-thinking athletic director that wanted to expand into the new territory of esports. So they ended up picking up our director of esports, like the director of esports program, and his name is Josh Dolan. I'm not too sure the last name. I'm pretty sure though. And he's kind of like the general manager of sorts, like equivalent to an esport org, and he has recruited all of the players. And right now, there's about 16 people on campus. We have a full Overwatch team and then two full league teams, and by next year we'll have 30. And basically the way it started was the AD hired Josh about a year ago, and he's been working to get our facility set up because we actually have like a LAN center on campus that has about 16 top of the line Alienware PCs, like 240 hertz monitors and stuff. And then he's been recruiting players, yes, for about a year. And we first arrived on campus this fall in August, and I've been here the whole ride. Like I'm one of the original joiners.
Nice. Now, what was that like for you being one of the first waves of scholarship earners, I'm assuming, or just like even one of the first waves of people to be working in this program?
It was pretty cool. I mean, I think with every program, especially into a new territory like esports, like it's really hard for a traditional school to have all the expectations and like all the resources that we need to get set up. And that's why, being the part of the first generation is always interesting. But, it's obviously a work in progress. And obviously, we haven't had some superstar all-star run like Maryville perhaps or Harrisburg, but we also don't quite nearly have the resources. But it's been quite interesting because I've gotten to get out of my environment, which was working full time on top of playing in contenders and stuff. So being able to be in a school where I can kind of gear my life entirely towards chasing my passion is something that's really helped me grow as an individual and as a teammate and as a player in games in general. So I'm incredibly thankful for St. Ambrose to start this program.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, I'm assuming that they're a relatively small school. I'm just not much aware of the school as a whole.
Yeah, I think the undergraduate population is about 3,000 students, so it's not tiny, but it's big enough that you don't know everybody for sure. I think it's mostly known as just kind of like a D3 sports school. So for people that want to maybe pursue sports, but they're not a D1 or D2 athlete, and obviously there's a lot of people from like Chicago and the Iowa kind of extended area.
Got it. So, I mean, this is a pretty big step for them because esports doesn't have the same divisioning as traditional sports. So this is a kind of a pioneering step for them. What's some of the thoughts and conversations going around with how they want to develop the program or like how they want to be in that forefront?
I'm sorry, you cut off there a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. How do you think that the school is developing towards being that kind of pioneering step? Because I mean, with them being a smaller school, they're not competing on the same level as the other Division One schools, like traditional schools or traditional sports.
Yeah.
So, how is the school taking that approach to esports? And like, because there's no divisions in esports, they're kind of playing on the same playing field as like UCI and stuff, other schools like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think schools like UCI or so like if you want to talk about D1 collegiate esports schools, those are kind of like Maryville, Harrisburg, and then some of the other California schools and full ride schools. And like in the same way with traditional sports, if you're a D1 athlete, I'm assuming almost everything in your life is taken care of as far as financial and food and all that stuff. And I mean, while St. Ambrose has dedicated facilities, we're not full ride by any means, and we have currently like one full-time employee that works for us, and that's our director Josh. But we're looking to expand with coaches for every esport that we'll be in. So we'll have like a Overwatch coach, probably two league coaches, and then a BR coach. But right now, basically for as far as what the Ambrose right for as of right now, what Ambrose gives us is the facilities, our full-time employee, and then like the gym facilities and all sorts of like traditional like stuff like that.
Okay. And I mean, they're also one of the first schools, like within the first 50 that I've been hearing of, that's actually had a social media presence that's talking about giving out scholarships. And so, I mean, that's a big step. That's a big investment for something that's so early on in its days of collegiate esports and esports in general in terms of gaining mass attention. How does that play into SAU's approach to development? I mean, they're clearly invested in this and they're clearly taking steps to grow it, but where's that line drawn in terms of investment and pursuit of doing this?
Uh, I mean, I think their investment in it was mostly just trying to get ahead of the a ball game thing. I'm not too sure exactly the long term plans because those aren't conversations that I've had with like the directors and stuff. But like I think that the biggest reason why they wanted to jump into the esports scene is because they realize that in 5 to 10 years, it's probably likely that we see esports in some capacity at almost every major college, whether that's like a varsity program or just like a heavily supported club. Just because I think most college students these days play video games, I would say a high majority. But as far as like long term plans and stuff for growing that, I don't really have much of an answer because I just don't know. That's not really something I'm really in the know in.
Fair enough. You never know. There's a lot of conversations that get shared amongst the kind of the leadership around some of the other esports clubs. So you never know what kind of conversations go on. So thought I would poke at that.
Yeah. No, I'm not too privy to that stuff. I just think that for right now they're mostly focused on getting a consistent, stable um, program going. Because I mean, even if you're into something new, having 30 new students involved in it is something that I think is a challenge in itself. So I think that's what the main focus right now. And then once they have that stabilized, I'm sure we'll hear more about long term plans.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, now that I recall, I believe that this fall was the first semester where they were offering this, correct?
Yeah, so this semester is the first semester that scholarships been offered, and I think that as far as like other schools too, it's for the most part, outside of League of Legends, it's been the first time that scholarships have been offered for esports. So yeah, definitely one of the first schools for that.
Okay, so that makes a whole lot more sense. Like, invest, see where it goes, and then start planning long term and making sure that you understand the ecosystem.
Yeah, because I mean, when you think about it too, you have to remember that esports is so infantile and so volatile that making plans past maybe 2 3 years is probably a little bit silly because it's not really been mainstream for more than 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you think about it in terms of growth, I believe that collegiate esports is like 2 to 3 years behind the professional scene and getting that national attention.
Exactly, and I mean another thing that you have to think about too with collegiate esports that's different is you're not just committing to playing a game. You have to commit to school, and committing to school is a much bigger serious commitment. Like you might have a roster in an Overwatch team change once every couple of months, but it's not like you can just hot swap in and out of college. So that's something that's entirely different, and that's something that I think collegiate esports will have to tackle is how do you really deal with roster trades, acquisitions, dropping. That's something that colleges have a completely different stance on because again, like you can't just join and drop out of college very quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, when we start talking about scholarships and going to school on a scholarship, you have to think about, is there like a duration with those scholarships? So if you get one offer from one school, commit to there, but then at the end of the year you get a new scholarship for a whole lot more than what you were getting at that school, where there was that idea of continuing on, you may just be jumping from school to school if there's not tight contractual obligations.
Yeah, exactly too, and that's the thing that I think in the long term, 3 4 years down the road, I think it'll probably be a semester system. That would be mean the most sense to me because I still think that esports will be pretty volatile as far as rosters changing around. And I think once you start talking full ride programs, I think it would be reasonable to see semester long contracts, potentially a year. I think it just depends on again what kind of long term leagues develop as well. Because right now if you talk to most schools are going to be built around the Riot Collegiate Tournament, or in this case, TESPA for Overwatch. Um, and then additionally, there's some other like programs like CSL, I believe. And then NACE is the third one. But NACE is kind of not necessarily a tournament organization, but kind of just a general body for collegiate esports. So that's something
Yeah.
that you have to build around the season as well.
And what kind of season is the collegiate Overwatch like? Because I'm not very familiar with that.
So Collegiate Overwatch is basically built around TESPA because TESPA is, I believe, a subsidiary of Blizzard. I'm not too sure on that. I just know that they run the main Overwatch tournaments. So it's essentially a league format. Like they had the preseason, which was the first fall semester, and now they have the real season, at least for the money in the spring. And that's basically kind of an online league played, I think, once or twice a week, kind of in a similar format to like Overwatch's Open Division. And essentially, you compete college versus college until the playoffs. So you have like a kind of a league play for a couple of weeks, and then you get fed into a 64 team bracket for playoffs, and then the winner of that 64 team the winner of that bracket would win $2,000 per person in scholarship money or something of that sort. I'm not too sure the exact specifics, but essentially league play and do a 64 team tournament, and then the winner of that would get a prize of money.
Okay, so fairly standard, but we're still talking like a full year investment. So Overwatch may not be seeing that semester, or actually, you know what? You could probably still see that semester contract so that it's during the preseason, you figure out your team, figure out who's
Yep.
working, who's not working, and then you could have that trade. That's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things that esports is fairly unique again because, I pursued this as a professional or as a profession from my home, and it's not like a basketball or football team where the school provides some sort of resources to. So like you can play esports from anywhere, and that means the nature of the game is that people want to join and leave teams a lot faster than a traditional maybe like a college basketball or football player would.
Yeah, and that definitely adds a certain amount of complication to serving these games, especially with how many games have competitive leagues. Like, you can't just compare all of esports to baseball or football. And I know that the NCAA, they were looking at more of a track and field like organization for major esports events if they were to pursue this in the future, but that would be in my mind, greatly diminishing to the individual teams because I mean, track and field, while there is team components on certain events, it's still mostly like a single person event, one at a
Yeah,
time.
yeah, for sure. So I think the best situation, looking at it right now, like is either you funnel all collegiate esports through a genre thing, so you have an FPS team, maybe you have a MOBA team, maybe you have a battle royale team. Something of that nature would be the most sense at this current moment. But also you could look at it from an esports perspective of like league games like League of Legends, Counter Strike, Dota, some games that have been around for decades now. You know, those you could just have teams on those esports as well. But I think that probably what happens is in the long term is you probably have, yeah, like I said, maybe like one or two FPS teams, one or two MOBA teams, one or two VR teams, and that would probably be kind of how you treat it. Just because of the nature of, you know, maybe one year Overwatch is really popular, the next year TF2 or something of that nature. Those skill sets transfer pretty well.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole other problem is the changing of the games. I mean, you go back what 2 years ago and everyone's like, "Oh my God, PUBG, this is the best game ever," and then Fortnite just says, "Hold my beer."
No. Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, that's the thing too. Is I think what makes an e athlete or whatever you want to call it, an e-sporter, whatever the term is, what makes them truly great is the ability to learn and that capacity to learn, and that's something that should transcend games. Like, of course, you're gonna have people that play games that are truly great in one game, but you're not going to have like a Michael Jordan. Like Ninja is called the Michael Jordan of esports, and that's not really true in my mind, because the Michael Jordan of esports would be a multi-year or multi-game dominant person that just kind of transcends his games and stays at the top of his game, kind of no matter what. And that's something that I think we'll see in the long term, is that we'll see players that um, maybe not necessarily game hop, but they're good in a variety of games at a top level. That's kind of what I think we'll see people gearing towards in the future.
I would like to see Ninja try and learn fighting games to nearly the level that like Sonic Fox knows fighting games. If there's an esport player out there who's the Michael Jordan of esports players, it's got to be
Yeah,
Sonic Fox. I mean, he is dominant in so many fighting games.
yeah, exactly, and that's something that like I think as collegiate esports develops, that's what we'll see more of, is people that are cross title dominant, because just because of the nature of collegiate esports at the moment is determined by publishers. So like right now, Blizzard decides to fund this league, or you know like before this previous semester, Paladins Hi-Res funds leagues, and so the nature of leagues for collegiate esports isn't necessarily something like a traditional sport where you have the NCAA. You just have wherever the publishers decide to send money. And so that's where the collegiate esports athletes will have to be. And being a collegiate esport athlete will definitely mean a lot of learning in games and learning in cross titles, just because of the nature of chasing prize money.
Yeah, and also that early notoriety of we are a top esport team come to our school. Like there's a lot more on the line in terms of the next 10 years depending on how these first few years go.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, like you look at a school like Maryville, which is, in my opinion, probably the top school across any esport title at the moment. And the reason why is because, you know, they have the funding and the resources to build the teams across all different games. You know, like League of Legends or Overwatch, or I don't know if they have a CS:GO team, but they might have another FPS game team. I'm not too sure. But like schools like that, they attract audiences entirely just because they're have an esports team, and then people want to go there. You know, like one of the things I have kind of like a long term project on is people at St. Ambrose could come here to work as like maybe a team manager or an analyst or a coach. And our school is so many traditional athletes that there's a lot of programs built around traditional sport management, traditional sport coaching, that could easily be applied to esports. You know, and you could come here. Maybe you're not. Maybe your dream is to be an esport coach or an esport psychologist. You could come here, work with an esport team in the collegiate scene, and also be studying a relevant field. And that's something that I think schools that are esport dominant will be in the market of. It's essentially not only building a top tier program as far as competing, but also building the support network and training those people to be there for all along the process. And that's something that I think collegiate teams will always have an advantage on over professional, is that if I'm in a campus of 3,000 people, there's going to be no shortage of people essentially to work with and have those resources if the school's geared towards a sports management type school or etc.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've heard from some other clubs and programs is just how widespread their application of esports kits. I mean, we're talking like nearly full-on production studios, and that's a lot of real life applicable experience to go and be able to know how to set up all these computers and how to manage backstage and how to cast or how to record and how to manage a stream. All of that stuff is now becoming very much a professional skill. And these schools are supporting the students, even if it's just through a club where it's just like, sure, you can have this room and these computers, do what you want, or where it's that we've invested, we want to build this out and have more students involved with this. They're really looking at like a long-term investment one way or another and a long-term impact to their reputation.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that we're so infantile with collegiate esports that that's stuff that it can be talked about and discussed and developed, and hopefully, 5-10 years from now, that'll be a big thing. You can come to be involved in all aspects of production in esports. So.
Yeah. And you actually mentioned being close to like Chicago and having some other folks being able out there. What's your relationship in terms of esports capacity with some of the other neighboring schools?
Schools, you said?
Yeah.
So there's schools like Augustana, which are it's another local school that's close that has an esports club, and that we get to interact with them. And also there's a local land center type gaming cafe called Paradigm that we actually have had frequent competitions at with other schools. I think we've competed against University of Iowa, some of the bigger schools, and like it's kind of interesting because I think something that could be really awesome in the future is having kind of like a LAN meetup with local schools. And we've done a small variation of that, but imagine if once a week you have kind of like an esport competition going on at the local LAN center. You have stuff like esports arena in California and Vegas and all that stuff. And if you could have colleges meeting up there to do tournaments, that'd be pretty interesting to do. To have that real life mini LAN experience.
Absolutely. I mean that ends up being another event that the colleges can broadcast. We are hosting this at this place, at this stadium with our stuff or at a kind of a neutral territory kind of thing. Do you have any rivals or rival schools that you compete against?
Rivalries I think take time to develop, and as we're only a semester old, with people, not a real hard rivalry. I think that stuff will definitely develop. As far as time. There's traditional rivalries for my school, which is like the University of Iowa and some of the other schools in our area. But I think just until the playing field's a little bit more level with every school having a scholarship back team, that's when that stuff will really develop.
Yeah, that's when people are going to get super salty about, oh, yeah, you went to that school because they have this or they have that. Not, you're not real hardcore about this. You're not legit.
Yeah.
That'll be fun to see and hear that develop. I know Ole Miss and Mississippi State University, they hosted an esports Egg Bowl, which is the Egg Bowl goes back like 100 years in rivalry with those two schools, and that's a really cool event to hear about. And they just hosted that first one, so I'm interested in those developing rivalries and hearing those events that come out, and that even if it's just a show match kind of thing where it doesn't really impact the seasons, but hearing more about those rivalries and knowing those stories as they develop is going to be cool to be there from the beginning.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, like I said, as that stuff develops, it'll be incredible, but it's gonna be a little difficult right now just because of how infantile it is.
Yeah, and I mean that's something that everyone's going to have to grow through, and it's going to. I'm sure it's going to get worse before it gets better at some point, or if for some reason the NCAA does find a way in and get a whole bunch of schools on board with that, like that'll be a whole nother tradition in my mind that sets the whole collegiate scene back at least a year or two just while everyone reformats.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I think to the NCAA, like when you talk about traditional sports. That's one of the things that I hope never gets involved with esports, just because of the fact that their understanding and kind of control of traditional esports is not going to translate very well at all. I think that organizations like NACE, organizations that are specifically geared for esports by esports people, are going to be the people that we want working with us, just because of the fact that if you for example applied half the rules that NCAA players would have, you would utterly crush Leisure esports.
Oh yeah.
Example in some of those rules would be like uh, sponsorship rulings, or certain, like, as far as getting tournaments organized. I'm sure it'd be a whole mess, and that's something that we don't need.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many problems, and with just the way NCAA handles traditional sports, and then there's just so many ways that all of those approaches, even beyond the things that are problematic, just do not apply to esports, and so they would have to solve 100% more than they really think that is problematic with what they know is problematic right now.
Oh, for sure.
And that would be a mess. But I mean, it would be a juicy story to follow up on for sure and see how that develops. But I'm with you. It's something I hope we never see, because in my mind, as soon as you get the NCAA involved, you're taking a lot out of control of the students and from the clubs that aren't scholarship or don't have a whole bunch of college support. Like as soon as you put that stamp on, like no, you have to do this at this level, it gets super messy and it takes a lot of that production skill or those practical skills that I mentioned earlier. You take those away from the students, and then they're no longer learning, they're no longer growing and developing that second set of skills while going to college for whatever they chose to go to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, I guess where do you think that the program's going to go from here in terms of like Overwatch specifically? Like how did you guys do during the fall season, the preseason, and then you're getting a new team? What, like, maybe set some expectations for how you think the next 2 semesters are going to go?
I think that we competed in the fall at Hugh Fest and some other small tournaments, and we did very incredibly well. We went against, like, for example, against Maryville, which is a incredibly experienced roster of all higher tier players, and we came in with me on an off roll that I wasn't necessarily prepared for. We had a player that had never played Overwatch before. In any aspect, he was a League of Legends player, and just kind of switched over because we had a spot to fill, and we were able to, compete with them on a stage and do fairly well. Considering that all of those players that they had competed at a professional level in some aspects. Maybe they weren't professionals, but they competed against professionals. And we took them for a little bit of a run. So we did incredibly well there, and I think that something that will be the tale to tell over this next coming semester is how well we round out with this new wave. Unfortunately, the team didn't work out just because of the nature of school, and it can be high stress, especially when you mix it with esports. We didn't
Oh,
get
totally.
the same roster, but hopefully with this new roster, we're able to keep the same sticks around for a little bit and build some synergy, and then hopefully, be in the top 10 in the nation. I think that'd be a reasonable goal for us. It's all dependent upon, again, essentially what competitions we go into, because for example, for Overwatch specifically, Tespa is probably the king of rankings. So finishing top 10 Tespa would be a great accomplishment, I think, for us. Otherwise, other than that, I mean, we do local lands in the area. The Midwest would be cool. I would love to see us prove to be the best team in like the Midwest area. I think that when you talk about kind of the domination or the dominant teams, you have Harrisburg on the East Coast, you have Maryville and kind of the Central East, us kind of towards the Western East. Then you have the California schools and ASU, of course, on the West Coast. And if we can compete on that level in any aspect, I'll be pretty happy.
Seems like a legitimate goal to set considering you're scrambling your whole team as well. So good luck with that for sure. And how about League of Legends? Do you know much about how that team's going?
So I'm not as well in the know. Obviously, I know the guys pretty well, and I know that they did fairly well. Again, getting people to come to college is something that worked out. That didn't work out all the ways that they hoped. So I know that we have a roughly a high diamond Masters, or I'm not actually entirely sure on league rankings, but like the Diamond one, and then the rank above that, that's like the average. So wherever that would compete, I know they do fairly well. Um, as far as how they would place on a ranking scale, I have honestly no clue, and I'd assume they do well. But I know that for League of Legends, there's quite a few full ride or healthily competitive schools that probably will be better. Because again, we're not a full tuition scholarship or full ride by any means, so those schools probably have a better choice of players than we will just because the nature of free school.
Fair
So
enough. I mean, at the same time, like some people are going to have that chip on their shoulder and they're going to want it more. And I mean, I always have to root for the underdog.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's something that I think, time will tell. Our league boys could show up really in a big way, and that's just something I'm not so familiar with. I don't want to put them out on the spot. So
Sure, no worries. Yeah, you guys are showing up already. I mean, the fact that you have performed so well already within TESPA, people are going to start noticing. People are going to know that. People are going to know SAU, and that's just something to build off of. And if with it being your first semester of competition between those two sports, it would be really interesting to see how well you can maintain that sense of growth and progression before you take that backslide, because there is going to be that backslide, whether it's kind of like the rookie wall where your star player just falls off the face of the earth in terms of ability, or where it's just like the meta shifts and you end up playing on a different build and it's just like you lost your footing, and you'll get it back, but like how the school recovers from that, how the school manages that's going to be the big moment. So I don't worry about you guys so much in this first year. It's going to be a learning year, and then it's going to be that second year when you feel like you know what you're doing. How well can you hold on to that?
yeah, exactly. And we'll see. I think that the SAU will really show up in a big way next fall semester, just because we'll have a year of experience under our belts. We'll have all the kinks and stuff figured out, and also we'll be able to have more support from the school. I think that kind of as we talked about earlier, this is definitely just a trial or test in the sense of experiencing esports and seeing where it can go. And if we in a year from now, or the next fall semester, we have done well, I would assume that the school would want to support that with more resources or something of that nature. There's been rumors of ESPN supporting a collegiate league, which if we have more exposure, then of course schools will want to get involved in bigger ways, and that's something that if SAU already has their foot in the door, I could only see them wanting to support that more. So
Oh, that's interesting. That's the first I had heard of a potential ESPN league. I will have to dig into that a little bit. That's
yeah.
that's really cool.
Well, I mean, when you look at it like Owl, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
looking at basically the Overwatch model itself, um, ESPN's already heavily involved with Blizzard, so I mean, it would only make sense for them to be some in some capacity. Last year, again, speaking on shorthand memory, is the Owl Collegiate Finals were held as part of the Rose Bowl or part of one of the big football cups, and they were also involved in like sports media. I don't know if they were streaming on ESPN or on ESPN, but I know they were involved in stuff. And so, of course, with the Owl having partnerships, that would be an easy conversation. And then also too, you have to think about um, games like Fortnite. I believe have had a lot of support in traditional media for colleges. There's a land called WESOE in California that was broadcast on TV, I believe. So like
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah,
only
yep.
logical next steps. Like if they already have those steps made, then they'll easily move forward with that. In college, I would say.
Absolutely. And it makes sense for someone like ESPN to do something like that. I mean, they have to stay relevant. There's been a lot of conversation about how they're going to stay relevant considering traditional sports is kind of going downhill. People are cutting the cord. People aren't buying the expensive cable packages. So what do they have to do to retain viewers? And I mean, esports is the obvious choice at this point, because otherwise it's down to the individual sport leagues, and not all of them are going to support that. I mean, you've had like Ninja and a few other streamers casting like Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football on their channels. So that's a huge investment. Or getting the NFL uniforms in Fortnite, like that's the kind of stuff that we're going to see eking more and more into esports, and it's going to be interesting to see how that changes people's view of traditional sports and their role in that competitive environment.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that, we'll only see develop in the future. Um, I just think that when you think about like when I thought about when I watch college esports or college sports in general, it's a lot of football and stuff, and that's always been broadcast heavily with rivalries and all sorts of stuff. And I think that esports will translate really great into that, because you're engaging a whole new population of people that don't follow football or don't follow soccer, and they'll be just as intensely committed to a League of Legends team as they would be a football team or a basketball team. But you're just talking about different audiences. So
Yep. I mean, it's going to be a wild ride over the next few years just because everyone's going to figure out what they want for themselves, and it's going to be interesting who comes out to be that dominant structure. How is it going to shake out? Is it going to really be split between like Nace and Tespa and CSL to really kind of carve out their own niche with it? I mean, Nace, I believe, has the Paladins League, but Tespa is pretty much or entirely Blizzard games. So, and then there's like the offshoot startups like Collegiate Rainbow Six. It's just an org dedicated to Collegiate R6. There's not like a traditional backend like Nace or where they're trying to be like, we want to own a section of esports. It's just, no, we just want R6. And how much money is there really in that? How much longevity is there really in that? That's going to shake out over the next few years.
yeah, exactly.
Well, why don't you do shout outs for how people can maybe reach out to you to talk about SAU esports or ask questions or what the right channels are for that or maybe where they can follow you casting or streaming?
So Twitter is easiest, of course. At Del Overwatch, DEL Overwatch at Twitter. You also can add me on Discord. My tag is Del, capital DEL, # 1337. Pretty easy. Delete.
Nice.
And other than that, you have my Twitch, which is the same stuff. But if you follow my Twitter and you send me a DM and you want to talk, it's a good place to get in touch with me, or Discord as well. I'm on there daily. As far as SAU, we have the SAU Esports, which is at SAU Esports, or sorry, SAU underscore Esports. We have our links to Discord. We have links to pretty much everything. Of course, you can always go to our website and track down Josh's email, and that's stuff that would be really easy to get in touch with. But yeah, if you have any concerns or you want to talk to me, Twitter is probably the easiest way to get in touch, and I'll happily redirect anything I can.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate the conversation and I hope you have a nice night.
Yeah, you too.
Good luck in Overwatch.
Thanks, man.
Take it easy.